Well, joining me now is legal academic and author Rocco Lioacono. Rocco, thank you for joining me. Happy Australia Day to you. But as we reflect on this National Day of celebration, it is hard to ignore the confused priorities of our politicians. They're ignoring population, power, prosperity, cost of living, and we've got those distractions as well. What's it going to take to get us to focus on the real issues?
Happy Australia Day to you, Cory, and to all the viewers. Look, you talk about the confused politicians and that they're insulated with their jet-set lifestyle. I'm on holiday at the moment, and there's a beach not far from where I am, full of people celebrating Australia Day. They've even brought down their barbecues on the beach. It's full. It's got Australian flags everywhere. What it's going to take is we need to remember something that Keith Woolahan, who's the new Liberal member for Menzies, said. We need to remember, or politicians need to remember, they're not there to make a career. They're there to make a difference. And the problem at the moment is that unfortunately they're so far removed from these problems because unfortunately they've spent their entire lives making that career. They haven't had to worry about running their own business, making sure that food's on the table, these bread and butter issues that are so important to everyday Australians. John Howard, back in the 90s when he had his second stint as opposition leader, was pilloried at the time for saying that Australians should be relaxed and comfortable. But he hit the nail on the head because everyday Australians don't want to worry about these things. They want to make sure that they can turn the lights on when they need to. They can get the kids a good education. They can provide for their families as best they can and ensure that their businesses are running well and successfully in order to do what each generation has done up until now, to make sure that their children have more than what the previous generation left them. That's always been the great Australian dream, and that's what our politicians should remember.
They should, and it's been nearly 2 decades since the Howard government, of course, and it just seems the distractions are escalating. One you can't ignore today is the push from the politicians for a voice to Parliament. Here they were today. Have a look at this.
If not now, when? If not now, when will this change occur? And if not the people of Australia this year, who will make this change, which will improve our country, improve our national unity?
As you move around the community, it's quite obvious that people don't understand what it is that the Prime Minister's talking about. They understand that changing the Constitution is a big deal.
We deserve better than an advisory body. We have an opportunity to have a treaty that allows for, which is only through a piece of legislation, they could put 10 independent black seats in the Senate today, and we won't settle for anything less.
Rocco, I'd suggest that vision shows just how far our political class have fallen. You've got 3 different views on the same topic that the majority of Australians do not understand because there's a lack of detail from the government. The Prime Minister says it's going to bring us together, but it's going to divide us by race. And even though those who are meant to support an Indigenous population are protesting against it. This is a confused message. Little wonder our national unity is so fragile.
Oh, look, and I don't see how even more voices are going to stop or solve this confusion. I mean, this week we had Exhibit A in the no case against the Voice, if you will, because all it took for our national leadership to focus attention on what's going on in Alice Springs is a bit of media attention, and the Prime Minister got on a jet, went to Alice Springs and actually spoke to the people on the ground. If that's not an argument against a centralised bureaucracy that is going to be taking on different voices from different people, I don't know what is. The fact is that these are local problems that need local solutions, not a top-down solution from above that's going to be a panacea for all these problems. Again, I go back to what John Howard said back in the 80s in his first stint as opposition leader. What he encountered then is the same thing that Anthony Albanese encountered the other day. I'm sure he asked the people on the ground, what is the main problem here? And they would have said to him, stop the grog. They wouldn't have spoken. And the same thing with John Howard. It wasn't about a treaty. It wasn't about a voice. It wasn't about any of that. It was stop the grok, stop these problems. Politicians need now to listen. We've got 11 Indigenous people in the Parliament who would have the direct ear of their constituents, who can listen to their needs. So why then do we need some overarching body, which, as you say, is going to divide people on the basis of the traits that they've been born with, that they have no control over?
Yeah, you make a good point about the 11 Indigenous members of Parliament, but let's not forget there are 226 members of Parliament who can listen to their constituents, whether they're Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander or white, or they're new migrants here or being here for generations. They can represent the problems in their electorate. They can solve them, and many of them are just choosing not to do the things that are necessary. But, Rocco, I'm interested in this because there are legal ramifications for this voice. I mean, the Prime Minister has said that potentially there's not, but it's going to be an advisory body, but the Parliament can't really ignore it. What do you see as the legal implications of a Aboriginal voice to Parliament?
Well, I go back to what's happened in New Zealand. I mean, there we were told that the New Zealanders were told the Waitangi Tribunal, upon which this voice body is based, will only be an advisory body. But what's ended up happening is that it's a quasi-judicial body which now has a say on pretty much every piece of legislation that goes before the New Zealand Parliament. That's exactly, I think, what's going to happen here. Albanese himself said it'll be a brave Parliament that will ignore it. But in the same breath, he says it's not going to be justiciable. I don't see how the two marry up. Let's take the first one. Well, if you're going to say that it's merely an advisory body, but a brave Parliament will not be able to ignore it, well, then you're going to see the same problems that you have in New Zealand. And the Karma Langton report has actually said, look, it's not just limited, the voice won't be limited to Indigenous issues, it should be expanded to include every mainstream issue that comes before the Parliament. Well, in that case, we will have potentially ramifications on every single piece of legislation, every single piece of our lives that the government will have to look at, which will lead to obviously gridlock and other things. In terms of it not being justiciable, well, that's a failure of separation of powers 101. I mean, you can't have a parliament or an executive telling the High Court, look, this is in the Constitution, but you can't look at it. Of course, if it's in the Constitution, it's going to be justiciable. We've seen that in Canada with the Human Rights Act of 1982. That they said at the time, look, this is set in stone, it's not going to change. And in the 40 years since then, judges in the Supreme Court of Canada have seen fit to interpret it as they see fit. And that's exactly what's going to happen here.
Yeah, and that's why the detail is important in the knowledge, and I think it's going to fail, to be honest. But it seems that, the voice is designed to dominate political discourse this year and distract us from a bunch of things, but there's just the regular, in case of trouble, pull this cord sort of distraction. And one of those is the drive to get Australians to embrace a republic. The polls today suggest that more Australians are moving towards a republic because of the feuding royals. And yet, whenever it's put to a vote, it seems to lose. So is this just more of a distraction, Rocco?
Well, it's been tried before, hasn't it, Cory? I mean, I remember back in the early 90s when the Australian economy was in recession, the then Prime Minister, Paul Keating, decided that we needed to move towards becoming a republic. And at the time, I seem to recall polls were 70% in favour of maintaining the Queen as the head of state. And again, it's a trick that you say is being tried again. And Australian people at the time saw through it as an elitist pet project, rather than them realising that people come to this country because this constitution, which guarantees probably, as better than any written constitution in the world, a transparency, democracy and equality, has been a magnet for my parents and probably your forebears as well, Cory, and any other migrant who's come to this country, as a country that welcomes you with open arms because of the stability and the democracy that this country has guaranteed by our constitution. People will see through this like they saw through it back then.
Hey, Rocco, in the elevator pitch of what needs to be a priority and what needs to change in this country, what's your message to the Australian politicians?
Well, it touches on some of the things we've spoken about, and also what you mentioned in your editorial. Again, the politicians, as we've said, their priorities are those of people who are living in a parallel universe to the rest of Australians. They need to focus on those bread and butter issues, making sure that the greatest stabilising forces in our country, namely from an economic point of view, a small business, and from a societal point of view, families, are prioritised. They are the ones that have been the backbone of this country and will always continue to be the backbone of this country, and politicians need to make sure that their prosperity is facilitated in every way possible. We also need, I think, to take on the spirit of sacrifice that our migrants exhibited, that we have to make do with what we have, make the best of what we have, and not expect too much from each other and expect too much from government. At the end of the day, it's up to us.
Rocco, that's music to my ears. Families, small business, and a spirit of sacrifice in the name of getting ahead. Thanks so much for joining me on this Australia Day. You enjoy the rest of it.
Thanks.